Just a few words about Maytree, the institute that I come from. We are a private foundation. We're dedicated to reducing poverty and inequality in Canada, and we focus on a great deal on working with immigrants and diversity and migration, because our foundation believes in principle, Canada will never prosper unless its immigrants and refugees prosper alongside it. For us, immigration, diversity, migration is a cornerstone of nation building. Foundation takes a very practical approach to its work. We tend not to complain. We tend not to be aspirational. We always get to action, and we will be talking about that a little bit more. Coming back to the cities that are in this room, I want to acknowledge what binds us together, what sets us apart. Let's start with all the Europeans in the room, the majority. Whilst one does not think of Europe as a historical migration destination, in fact, in my view, it has a very intimate experience with it. Think of the Vikings, then the Anglo-Saxons, the Romans, the Huns, all the others who have passed through various regions of Europe, and some have stayed behind and taken root. Then there's the diversity that comes from your history as post-colonial societies. Brick Lane in London, parts of Marseille, the large sections of Brussels which pulsate to a different historical beat. And today, regardless of where you are in Europe, but as members of the EU, migration is being built into your DNA. Germany, I understand, has overtaken Canada, Australia, and the UK as the second largest destination for permanent migration. In contrast, the other states in the world, Canada, Australia, the US, and New Zealand, are more classic nations of immigration, where we have said to people, come to our countries, work hard, we will try our best for you. It is your children who will succeed. That's the narrative in these new countries of migration. This narrative is made so much more famous as written by Emma Lazarus, and you can find it if you go and visit the Statue of Liberty in the United States, where she says, "Oh, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." And so ingrained is this mythology in our immigration-migration narrative. As we are different, so is our discourse on diversity. When I say diversity, I mean one thing. When you say diversity, you mean another thing. So let's unpack this a little. In the US, to begin with, the civil rights movement and the hard-fought battle for African Americans is the foundational narrative. When they talk about diversity, they are mostly, not always, but mostly, talking about African Americans and their place in society. In Canada, our diversity discourse, even though it is far more grounded in our multicultural reality, which is large and significant, but even in Canada, when we talk about diversity, we're mostly talking about gender equity. Maybe we're talking about Quebec. In Europe, the diversity dialogue, and Europeans, forgive me, I'm an outsider, forgive me if I assess this wrong, I think your diversity dialogue is primarily about religion and possibly primarily about Islam. And in the UK, again, my perception is that diversity is actually more about race. In Australia and New Zealand, I suspect diversity is a construct that may be used to address the inclusion of Maori and Aboriginals. So let's acknowledge that when we talk about diversity, we're talking with a certain historical background that needs to be decoded. Getting on to diversity, what is it? You know, people say to me, what is it about diversity? And I would say, in a purely empirical interpretation, it is the presence, the prevalence of certain demographic features. As some people say, demography is destiny. However, I want to say that diversity in and of itself, once you discount its demographics, is not as interesting as what you do with it. It is the new arrangements, the new approaches, the new instruments that lead to inclusion that are the real story. So I want to make sure that we understand the difference between the passive demographic reality of diversity and a proactive, opportunistic agenda for inclusion. Let me provide you with a metaphor that I hope makes my point. Imagine a newcomer to a city. Let's call her Shamira. Shamira has chosen a city that is indifferent, possibly benign, even hostile to diversity. She is left to her own devices, her own luck, to find her way forward. She feels like a guest in a house, a guest that is tolerated, maybe even somewhat welcomed by one or two neighbors, but not really included. She makes her own way forward, and depending on her luck and some accidents, she is able to gain a small foothold in society, which she guards very jealously. Still, she has the habit of bumping into the furniture in the house because it is a strange house, and she's not allowed to go to the third floor. But what can she do? She is a guest. Now imagine another city where Shamira is made to feel welcome and included. She learns the rules of the house, how the house works, the rules of how to manage things, how to work the appliances. She learns what it costs to run the house, how to pay the bills, and in time, she feels ownership enough of this house that she decides to paint it a new color. Because after all, it is her house too. That's the difference between passive acceptance of diversity and active inclusion. Let me unpack some of the diversity drivers that we all share in common. First, rising diversity is a manifestation of the desire of people everywhere in the world to move and to live and to have adventures and to fall in love and to study and to seek security and to find work. This is age-old, and this is never going to change. At any given point, there are 214 million migrants in the world. If you would put them all together in one country, that would be the 5th largest country in the world. Just imagine the size of that community. Second, rising diversity is also a manifestation of different lifestyles and the way people are choosing to define themselves differently with their family units. So there are nuclear families, extended families, blended families, single-parent families, same-sex families, selfie families, I don't know what that means, and the list goes on and on. And here is, of course, your most glorious interpretation of diversity. That requires no comments, I'm sure. Diversity, before we forget, we tend to forget this in the diversity discussion. Diversity is also about ability and disability. And lest we think this is a small group, let's remember, all of us will grow old one day. The figures are fairly high in Western society, 17% in Canada, 17% in the UK. In New Zealand, also 17%, oh my goodness. In Germany, this figure stands at 7.3 million people. We're all young today, but we're all going to get older. Let's also not forget religion, culture, rituals, values. When people come from different parts of the world, they bring a certain amount of baggage with them. Let's acknowledge in this room that if there is a challenge and if there is a values clash, it probably goes back to the issues of religion, values, culture, rituals. And we can discuss these. In the city that I call home, many years ago, when my children went to school, they celebrated New Year's. This is Canada. We celebrated Christmas. We celebrated Chinese New Year. We celebrated Diwali. We then began to celebrate Iranian New Year. As a parent, I got a little fed up because I had to keep putting things in her lunchbox to celebrate. And then we celebrated Kwanzaa, which I didn't even know about. But that's Canada for us. All of this makes a difference in how life is lived. Getting back to race, as people mix and mingle, they marry, they fall in love. Mixed race unions are on the rise everywhere in the world, certainly in Berlin. I saw a lot of them. I always say, when everything else fades, love and sex will always come to the rescue. And of course, there's the age-old difference between men and women, and even though in all our jurisdictions, the movement, the gender equity movement is strong. Let's also acknowledge, so is the glass ceiling. I read with some interest that in Berlin there is a movement to celebrate Ampel Männer, aber auch Ampel Frauen. Also ich finde, das ist ganz gut. So that's kind of interesting, even in Berlin. So we can unpack that joke a little later for you people who don't speak German. So diversity, I believe, is everywhere, even if you don't see it. It's a misnomer that diversity is only what you can see. That's not true. Diversity is even when you can't see it. So we're not even sometimes talking about diversity, but hyperdiversity, superdiversity, the hyperdiversification of diversity, and so on and so forth. And questions are asked, and these are reasonable questions, whether rising diversity represents a threat to freedom, whether extreme globalization on the one hand and extreme isolation on the other, communities choosing to live in isolation in cities where they've chosen to relocate themselves, where they are living in one place, but their hearts and minds are firmly in another place. What does it mean for here and now? There is no agreement on this question. Is diversity good? Is diversity bad? There is, let me give you both sides of the argument. There is the oft-cited work of Robert Putnam from Harvard, who found that high levels of diversity correlate to lower levels of trust and reduced indicators of social cohesion. But then, Harvard University again found compelling evidence, really compelling evidence, I don't have the time to unpack it for you, that diversity unlocks innovation and drives market growth. So which is it? Prosperity or isolation? I would say the truth probably lies on your intention. The answer is it depends. It depends on your intentions. Those who choose a proactive, progressive response are more likely to have cohesive societies that unlock prosperity. Those who are passive, even resistant to diversity, will choose to have the opposite. Let me invoke a great Canadian player. How many in the room know who that man is? Slight pop twist. Just one? Come on, Canadians, where are you? Yes. This is the greatest hockey player in the world, Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky. We adore Wayne Gretzky in Canada, national icon. He has said, a good hockey player plays where the puck is. A great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. So not today, but tomorrow. Not here, but somewhere else. So I want you to follow this diversity puck for a little while and play Canadian hockey with us. So first, here are the benefits. People ask me, what are the benefits of diversity? I'm going to take a little time to unpack them. First, and I believe very firmly in this, diversity breeds determination and resolve. The people we are talking about are normally not at the center of systems. They are, at least in the beginning, they are at the periphery, living on the edges of the mainstream. They are less satisfied, they are hungrier, they're more ambitious. They are willing to take more risks because they have less to lose. For those of you who are staying for the Cities of Migration conference, you will see the living proof of this in our closing keynote speaker, Einar Baldaz, who came to Germany as a cleaning lady and is now the owner of a multi-million-dollar international enterprise. To some extent, I think I too am an embodiment of living on the edges and fighting my way to the center. It gives you a certain drive and determination. Someone said to me, as an immigrant in Canada, this was a family member who said to me, remember, you are new to this country, and remember, you'll always have to be twice as better as someone else. I think there's some tension in that, but I've certainly lived that experience in my life.